So I'm Kerrie Mengersen. I'm the director for this QUT Centre for Data Science, and I'm welcoming all of you to this workshop from the Australian Data Science Network. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the First Nations owners of the lands at QUT, where I am now, the Turrbal and the Yuggera people. We pay the respects to their elders, their laws, their customs, and their creation spirits. We recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning, and we're of course joined by all of you from around Australia, and we acknowledge the First Nations owners of the lands on which you are as well. So thank you for joining us today. And over the past few years, we've seen a fair amount of what you might call official soul searching when it comes to data science in Australia. So there's been a lot of looking into what are Australia's capabilities, the opportunities and the challenges when it comes to data science. So late last year, as we know, the Australian Academy of Science released a report on advancing data-intensive research in Australia. And over the past few months, what we've been doing collectively is exploring different aspects of that report in this Australian Data Science Network series. Then, about 2 months ago, we saw the release of 6 more reports as part of a collaboration between the Australian Research Data Commons, the ARDC, and the Australian Council of Learned Academies, ACOLA, and the 5 Learned Academies. And the reports are environmental scans from each of the 5 academies and a synthesis report from ACOLA. Obviously, we can't go through all of the 6 reports, but what we want to do today is to quickly give everybody a better idea of the overall flavour and the direction of what these reports are trying to accomplish and what they might mean for our organisations and our universities and the Australian Data Science Network as a whole. So we're joined today by representatives from 3 of the Learned Academies. We have Isabel Ceron, Senior Policy Analyst for the Academy of Social Sciences of Australia. Welcome, Isabel. We have Professor Louisa Jorm, who's Chair of the Health and Medical Data Steering Committee for the report from the Australian Academy of Health and Medical Sciences. She's also Director of the University of New South Wales Centre for Big Data Research in Health. Welcome, Louisa. And we have also Professor Leslie Wyborn, who was the then Chair of the Academy of Science National Committee on Data in Science, that provided input into the Academy of Science report. Welcome, Leslie. So we're going to start, though, with Shannon Callaghan. So Shannon is a Senior Policy Advisor for the ARDC and was then Program Manager for the whole set of projects at each of the academies and ACOLA. So we've asked Adam to give us the big picture of this project before we hear the perspectives of those representing the Learned Academies. So Adam, Shannon, over to you.
Thanks, Kerrie. Welcome, everyone. So I'm located in Canberra on Ngunnawal country, but the ARDC has offices all over Australia. So the role of the ARDC is to provide Australian researchers with competitive advantage through data. And we do this by contributing national research data infrastructure in collaboration with Australia's universities and other research organisations. And we're funded through the Australian Government as part of the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy. Just in the time I have today, I just want to give some background, as Kerrie said, to the projects, the program and the various projects and the outputs that we'll talk about some of those today. So the genesis of the program came from a visit in mid-2019 by Simon Hodson, who heads up CoData. And CoData is the data committee for the International Science Council. And he met with Australia's Learned Academies, hosted by the Academy of Science. And he posed the question about how the academies were working together to solve some of the cross-domain challenges that were facing all of us globally. And from that conversation came the proposal that ARDC would lead and assist and coordinate a program of work. There was obviously a short hiatus thanks to COVID, but at the end of 2020 and then at the start of 21 proper, we started engaging with the academies to see what we could do to address those cross-domain challenges. And this program of work was a result of that. And really, the purpose of the project was to look to synchronise the developments of the data agenda across the academies. And in particular, one of the outcomes that we were looking for was to establish a network of data policy and planning capabilities across the academies. So we know the Academy of Science is quite strong in this area and they host the National Committee of Data, but we wanted to look towards developing more evenly the planning capacity for data infrastructure. In some ways, obviously, ARDC was looking to get something out of it, and the thing that we were looking to get out of it was to ensure that we were developing data infrastructure nationally, evenly across the domains, as well as addressing those cross-domain challenges. So not overemphasising one discipline or domain and in a sense over-supporting or over-investing, but making sure that we drew up everyone evenly. Additionally, I work for Adrian Burton and also Leslie, so we're very aware that of the report that Kerrie mentioned was also in process. And so we wanted this to be both an extension and complementary to that data report. So it's drawing out a particular theme or element and trying to extend that with collaboration with the academies themselves. In terms of the structure of the project, what we wanted to do was ensure we drew out the domain and discipline specific requirements. So we constructed the environmental scans, and that's the 5 reports from each of the academies. And then obviously a synthesis report by ACOLA over the top that was co-funded by ARDC with ACOLA and the academies. We used grand challenges or scenario planning with the academies. My sense is that worked quite well to draw out those big global challenges and try and activate those cross-domain conversations that were critical for what we were trying to achieve. And so in terms of the next steps, now that the reports have been delivered mid-year, there was some anxiety that because of COVID, we might have missed that the NCRIS roadmap process, but actually due to the delay in that road mapping process, I think it's worked out quite well that the academies are hopefully a bit better placed than they were to contribute to that. And in particular, there's the proposed National Digital Research Infrastructure Strategy that was in the roadmap, and that's about to commence development. And again, I think the academies should be well placed to contribute to that process. And lastly, at the last International Data Week, Simon Hodson announced a decadal program of those cross-domain challenges, so working globally. So again, hopefully we're well placed to start contributing to those international collaborations and initiatives that CoData is leading. I'm happy to take questions at the end if there are any, Kerrie.
Thank you very much, Shannon. That was that's an excellent overview. It's an exciting initiative and big initiative. Thank you, and also an exciting future. I think, as you say, placing us in good stead to be able to be better informed and to actually work together. So I'd like to call now on Isabel. Isabel, the floor is yours. Well, the virtual floor. You know,
the virtual floor. Thank you, Kerrie, and hello to everyone. Okay, so yeah, hello everyone again. My name is Isabel Ceron, and I was the lead for this project within the Academy of the Social Sciences in Australia. I'll try to respond to the brief I was given today and not focus so much on the report contents, but try and shed some light on what we see might be roles for data science and data scientists.
Excuse me, Isabel, it's not going forward. So if you meant it to go forward, it's not on full screen at the moment.
Oh, let me try that. Better?
Yes.
Yes.
That's we can see the first slide.
Yes, that's good. All right.
And now we can see the second one. Yes.
Awesome. No problem. Yeah. So I'll try to stick to that brief, which was what could be the role for, like, from our perspective, for data science and data scientists in a sort of digitally enabled future social science world. So yeah, I'll just start by describing some of the opportunities we identified and some of the challenges in realizing those opportunities. I'll throw in a bit of a provocation for what the solution or the way forward could be, and end with a call to action to you all today. Oh, Jesus. So those opportunities, and there are many for data science, I think. What are they? But before I head there, more generally about how we see the current state of the social science research infrastructure is like this. This is sort of what we came up with through this process. We think there's, yes, enormous need and opportunity for the social sciences in becoming more digitally enabled. However, at the moment, most of the practice that's sort of advanced is happening only in small pockets. And the growth of the social science research workforce is still pretty much operating in the business as usual, so the traditional research way. With more use of data, some use of like new tools, but overall still not the transformation that it could be. There are lots of very valuable efforts around to transform this, so to get these innovations in, but so far those efforts remain largely fragmented, and that makes this space especially hard to read. It's hard to know what's going on and who's doing what, both for outsiders and insiders as well. So what we say is the need in the social sciences sector for a backbone or a vision behind which, like, of what the future could be like, behind which stakeholders can, align and coordinate their efforts and hopefully advocate together for the stuff that they need. Now, particularly in terms of data science and some of the opportunities, and by opportunities I mean some of the work to do, I've listed here the 4 items that came most frequently during our consultations. So roles for you guys. First, to help social science, the average social science researcher imagine what is possible, what can be done. Often when we got them started on this digital sort of stuff, they got all riled up and excited, but it came to a point where they said, well, this is all great and good, but we don't know where to start. And behind that was the more fundamental question of, we don't really know what is possible. So there's a first role there for you in helping the social science researcher understand like what these possibilities are in terms of efficiencies, but also in terms of new ways of like new research questions that are now possible and opportunities in translation and whatnot. Second was we very often heard, well, we don't clean the data at the end and publish it because it takes so long. We didn't budget for that. So there's this phenomenon where social scientists don't budget for data work within their grant applications because they don't know, they don't know what the data work is. So it would be very helpful to have more of that knowledge of what data work is all about, and so that we can weave it into the grant applications and then get the funding to do it. And it's a big cycle, all of it. And more than that, it's a deeper thing. I was hearing Peter Sefton the other day. He was telling me it's more than just the data. It's a whole shift in thinking from research outputs as papers or publications. The actual research output is a more complex object made up of the data and the metadata behind the data, and then the code used for the analysis, and then the metadata behind the code. And it's a whole mind shift that is needed in the average researcher to see all that needs to be done to get into to be truly digitally enabled. Then there's the issue of incentives. In the social sciences, we struggle to get researchers from all the fields to work with us because our journals don't rank up enough citations compared to other fields. So I imagine there will be similar difficulties to attract data scientists to work with us. So we would like to know what those incentives would be. And lastly, and this comes from the inspiring Mark Finane, fellow in he's from Griffith University, director of the prosecution project. He said, it's not so much the quantitative social sciences that stand up to gain from a digital transformation, is actually in his opinion, the qualitative research, because that's the one that's done more manually with small samples and run in very idiosyncratic ways by each researcher. So each one, they all apply their own little style because they haven't had to do anything differently. He said, wouldn't it be a dream if we could have something like the Human Genome Project, that sort of scale of thing applied to our qualitative research? And so we would need data scientists to get there. to be able to, reimagine sort of. So yeah, there's lots of very exciting work to be done. And now challenges. So I do see the challenges as largely as a workforce problem, because we have our social science research workforce that lacks sort of those skills and that vision. But I'm not sure there are enough data scientists to simply, fill that gap just by the numbers. With the whole digital sort of revolution, data scientists are needed in industry, and they're needed in startups, and they're needed in research, and they're needed everywhere. And what I hear left and right is, oh, we can't find someone to come do this, to come develop this tool for us that we're dreaming of. We can't find the data person or that technical person. So one of the solutions that gets thrown around is, well, why don't we train social science researchers to become data scientists as well? And I was like, that is just as hard. So yeah, what's to be done, And so what I like to throw in as a provocation here today is something I found in the Harvard Business Review magazine from June. And these guys in the magazine were looking at digital transformations in the business world. But they're pretty much struggling with the same things. And so yes, I'll just go with it. They say, well, first, when we think digital transformation, it's not marginal change in terms of let's just use a little bit more data or let's just use more tools. It's actually redesigning the whole business model, the whole research, in this case, business model. And then the second point is the scale of change needed to do this reinvention is in the scale of the millions of innovations. In the business world, they estimated the amount of new sort of solutions, digital solutions needed to be 500 million between 2020 and 2023 to just, keep up the momentum. And in their words, this cannot be accomplished by small groups of technologists and data scientists walled off in organization silos. So what they think the solution is, so they've looked at the companies that have actually been able to pull through and really transform the organization. And in what they see, these people did right was they structured it differently. They did train everyone down to the manager and the frontline worker in data skills, but not all the way through to become data scientists themselves, but just enough to, how they put it, release the innovators in the workforce. And then they kept the data people in the background, in the driving seat, making sure that the infrastructure and the architecture was there. And specifically, the task for the data scientists in this space would be to make sure that the tools that are available to the frontline people are intuitive and that the environments and the data are kept secure. So yeah, my provocation today to you guys is that the way forward, something like that in the research, organizations? And we have no idea. My call to action is, please help us figure it out. We are, as a result of this exercise with the ARDC, we want to begin. We are in the early stages of developing a decadal plan for the social science research infrastructure. So to me, success today would be if one or two of you email me later and say, Isabel, I'll help you figure this out. So I do look forward to hearing from you. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I'm sure there'll be lots of people that'll be happy to contact you afterwards. That was great. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Louisa.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for the invitation to speak today. Thank you to the Australian Data Science Network, and also like to thank the ARDC for their support for this cross-academy project. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the various lands on which we're meeting. In my case, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here in Sydney, and just pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are in the audience today. Just a little bit of background about the Australian Academy of Health and Medical Sciences, which is the youngest and newest of the Australian Learned Academies. And basically what it is an impartial cross-sector voice of health and medical sciences. And there's around 448 fellows currently. And basically the Academy is an independent interdisciplinary body. If you take a look at the website, you'll see that the fellows come from a very broad range of backgrounds and disciplines, but basically have a voice as the nation's leading experts in health and medicine. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about our report that we developed as part of the Aladdin project. Shannon mentioned that it was a sort of scenario planning exercise. This was not a particularly familiar approach to most of the people who were involved in the project, but it was a sort of a refreshing type of approach. It seemed to come from a bit of a military type of background that we do this scenario planning. And in some ways, I think what we ended up more was a discussion around some big areas of challenge, but hooking it on to particular health challenges, I think was very helpful. And we had 3 scenarios that we looked at. They related to dementia, obesity, and antimicrobial resistance. Those 3 things I think you'd recognise are very significant challenges. And we framed up the scenarios around actually a positive future in terms of the future actually looks relatively negative at the moment around, in particular, obesity and antimicrobial resistance. So what we were really looking at was what data resources, what infrastructure, what assets, policies and skills will actually help us to achieve more positive futures in these grand challenge areas through research. We involved both fellows and also other expert invitees in 3 roundtables. So there was one for each of those challenge areas. They were held fully virtually. They were really, I attended all 3 of them. They were, people really welcomed the opportunity to actually discuss as researchers what were some of the, the things that really could make a difference. And I think the thing that was perhaps most striking about the 3 roundtables was that even though the composition of the groups was quite different, their expertise was different, the topics were really different, there was a great deal of commonality, I think, in what came out of each of those roundtables about what some of the key opportunities, challenges and gaps are. And I'm not going to focus so much on challenges and gaps, but rather on what opportunities people thought were the big ones. And really, I think a key message that came out of this project was that there's just burgeoning amounts of electronic data in health and medicine, but we've had for many, many years some really excellent data that basically is generated routinely through the operation of the health system. That is, should really be the envy of other countries if we could only get access to it for research. Because we have a largely publicly financed health system, we have population-based data, that relate to every hospital admission in Australia, every emergency department presentation, every birth, every cancer registration. But our state and territory and Commonwealth arrangements have meant that there have been a lot of barriers in place to actually integrating data across those sectors. And in particular, the management of primary care, MBS and PBS by the Commonwealth government, and then the hospital system by state and territory governments has meant that bringing data together for individual people over time and across jurisdictional boundaries has just been a very major difficulty for pretty much as long as I've been in the game. And this came up again as being just this is the number one thing. If we could only better coordinate and integrate policies, data governance processes, in particular across the state and territory boundaries, and in particular that there be more of a voice for researchers in that process, because it is government held data. Often the processes are aim towards better access for governments and don't take into account the researcher voice or what researcher needs may be. A key opportunity that relates to that is a national linked data asset that brings together those basically already existing data, but very much streamlines the access to them for researchers. And such an asset would go beyond, what's traditionally thought of as being health and medical data to including, for example, data relating to social determinants of health that I think would also be of great interest to the social scientists around areas such as housing, education, community services, justice, and so on. Another big opportunity was to actually grow and nurture data skills in the health research and healthcare sectors. Again, as Isabel mentioned, many people brought up difficulties in actually hiring people. Not so much that there weren't lots of applicants to many jobs, but that they didn't actually bring quite the right skills and expertise with them to work with health data. And that there's actually quite a big divide between people who are coming out of computer science, machine learning, AI type of backgrounds, and people who come from more traditional health, biostatistics, statistics, epidemiology backgrounds. There's quite a gulf there in terms of speaking different languages, having different terms for the same things, and even the very approach to research, such that I think both of those two groups have a lot to learn from one another. So in health and medicine, there's not a great tradition of actually sharing data or sharing code or sharing anything very much, but rather competing with one another, while it's far more natural for people from computer science backgrounds to, as a matter of course, share their code and make that available. So there's a lot to be done there, but I think there's also a lot that can be done. And again, the social science sector may be similar in trying to grow data skills within existing people who are already in the sector, as well as trying to encourage new people into health and healthcare. We don't have that much trouble actually attracting people into health and healthcare, mainly because a lot of people have a fairly high degree of altruism and are interested in applying their skills in these areas. But nonetheless, we are still competing, obviously, with a whole range of startups and other sectors that can potentially, offer better career pathways and more money. So, trying to become competitive is a challenge. Another opportunity was building social license for use of data in health and medical research. This is viewed as being a barrier currently that other countries have actually taken on large-scale programs to try to make people more familiar with what research is done using their data, what are the benefits of it, what are the risks of it, not glossing over the fact that there are always going to be potential risks in terms of patient privacy, for example. But there's really not much debate about this. There hasn't been in Australia, and I think the Academy is particularly interested in that area of trying to encourage social license for the use of health data. And then the final one was embedding Indigenous data sovereignty. There's, a huge and fantastic body of work starting to emerge around Indigenous data sovereignty, but it's still existing in many cases somewhat outside the formal processes for data governance, ethics, and so on. So how does one actually operationalize those principles of Indigenous data sovereignty? And then aside from those key opportunities, there were a few sort of more ambitious sorts of things that were regarded as being a little bit further off perhaps, but maybe of interest to this group. One was this idea, okay, we're very interested in having this national linked data asset, but to really use that for cutting edge research, there's a requirement that researchers can bring their own data sets and actually plug it into that infrastructure. So for example, clinical trials, most clinical trials actually do not currently undertake data linkage to look at the long-term outcomes of patients enrolled in the trial. It would be really great if you could just plug your clinical trial in and then have long-term follow-up occur just through linkage with routinely collected data. Similarly, for clinical registries, cohort studies, a whole range of studies that could actually benefit from this population-based follow-up through data linkage. There's, again, a lot of interest in so-called research-ready data sets that are derived from electronic health records and from resources such as My Health Record. The issue here is that most of those data sets are not at all research ready when you extract them from the back end of, for example, of a hospital electronic medical research EMR system. They are just a mess of hundreds of different tables. They are not mapped to any particular common data model. You know, they're data that have basically been collected and used for operational purposes at the patient bedside, not with a view to them being used for any analytics. And so some pipelines to actually create those research-ready data sets, again, is infrastructure that people were keen on. It's something that's fairly hard to achieve because at the moment, most, you know, the governance around those electronic health records tends to sit quite locally at the level of a hospital or a local health district, or even a general practice. Again, an area that was raised is there's a huge amount of interest in AI and use of AI in healthcare, but there's in fact very few Australian data sets that can be used to build AI algorithms. A couple of years ago, I did a review of an area of machine learning called patient representation learning, and found that around 60% of the published research in that area internationally was all done using one single data set called Mimic3, which comes out of Harvard, basically, Boston. And it's just used by all of the researchers across the world because they have managed to release it in a de-identified, fairly freely available form. And the machine learning and AI researchers operate by sort of benchmarking what they're doing against other groups using a single data set. If Mimic3 is the only data set out there, that's what they use. But if you sort of have a look at the patient population within something like Mimic3, you'll see that people who attend that hospital in Boston are really a very different group to what might be rocking up to Liverpool Hospital in Sydney in terms of, in particular, very low representation of people from some of the diverse ethnic backgrounds that we have, and obviously no Aboriginal people. And if those individuals aren't included in the data sets that are used to build machine learning or AI algorithms, you really run the risk of them not being applicable to those subgroups and potentially causing harm. So how do we get some more Australian data sets that we can actually share amongst researchers in a much more open way to enable us to develop and benchmark AI algorithms? And then again, this whole idea of an AI-enabled health and
just one
medical.
more minute, okay? Just
Yep,
one more
I'm
minute.
stopping. This is
That's
the end.
Perfect.
Finally, again, the idea that the health and medical research workforce needs to be data and AI enabled, and basically there's very little formal content in these areas at all in most of the undergraduate training for our health professionals today, and that's it. So obviously you can access our report there, and there are the contact details for the Academy as well.
Thank you, Louisa. I really appreciate the way that you've brought these opportunities and the more ambitious goals that would be relevant for this this audience. I really appreciate that, and people are obviously able to read the more complete report, the complete report. I'm going to hand over to Leslie now. Really, Leslie, it's your turn now.
Okay, thanks, Kerrie. I may have to turn my video off because I don't have a good connection at my home, but I'll just let me know if it needs to be turned off. Okay, so this is the report from the Academy of Science. And first of all, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, seas and waters of the areas I live, work and meet on. I acknowledge their continuing connection to their culture and respect their elders past, present and future. And I just thought I'd put up here, this is the artwork designed for the new supercomputer Guardi at NCI. And as you can see, the artwork here symbolizes the gathering of knowledge from different places and sources and the bringing together of an even greater collective knowledge. And I think that's what we're all about and fundamental to what each one of the groups is talking about. I think it's important that we grappled with the definition of research data and emphasised that for our Academy report, it is data generated by, collected or accessed for research activities. So what that means is we want access to data from all sources, research, government, industry and public. We do not know how much, but we argue there is potential, particularly in the government data assets, for value for research. But at the moment, it can be very siloed and not easily accessible. It's been mentioned, the report that we did builds on an early Academy report that recognised research data challenges in data science. And so I'll just quickly go through. We need people with the skills to work with data. We need investment in data infrastructure and in integrating it. We need consistent standards, international collaboration. We need to consider the storage, analysing, management of large amounts of data. We need more open science practices, and researchers need data facilities, tools and skills to be able to do the research that they want to do in data intensive research or modern data science. So coming down to the Aladdin project, we initially developed a shared approach between the academies and developed a scenario planning to interrogate the data issues. The Academy of Science report was compiled by consultations with researchers and experts over quite a wide range of science disciplines that are represented within the Academy. We held our multidisciplinary workshops, but we cut our workshops under the 3 types of understanding and prediction to reflect the different scales and needs for different types of research. So just briefly, discovery is where you have a data set and someone makes a discovery, scientific discovery from that. The next generation is where we develop an understanding and work on that. Why is it so? Why do we have this connection? And then finally, there is like the end phase of research where you're using what you've learned from discovery and understanding to be able to develop prediction systems such as in climate for modelling, etc. And so we held those 3 workshops, and the key cross-cutting issues, so I'm going to say across the disciplines and those 3 themes, discovery and understanding and prediction, were that we need implementation of fair and care principles across all research data. There's a need for linked national data sets and an integrated ecosystem of repositories that include research, government, industry, and public. Many large government data assets are difficult to access for research. Research funding needs to recognise the cost of managing data from research and to preserve data that needs to be long-term, well beyond the life of the project. We had too many instances where there was funding to generate the data, get the report out, but nothing to preserve it afterwards. The infrastructure we need is both physical and human, and we need coherent data policies that enable ethical use of data and build social license and consider First Nations data sovereignty. But researchers need new skills to use and manage data. But above all, we felt what was lacking was a national research data strategy that considers data from all 4 sectors. So what could we do to get started? We said that you could consistently implement the FAIR principles. It's very haphazard, and recognize the cost of managing research data in funding. We need coordinated data access and sharing agreements of data between governments, research and industry. It's too siloed. We need clear academic pathways for data scientists and acknowledgement in research outputs. We need to build data skills amongst all researchers of any scientific type and of any generation from early career to late career. But we need to recognise and reward good open science practices And again, I come back to developing a national research data strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. That's excellent. And thank you to all our presenters for providing that summary of the reports and of the findings of the reports. I'd like to ask if anybody from the audience has any questions. Please put them in the chat, and we will now be in asking general questions. And I'd like to start with a question of, like, you've outlined some of the opportunities and some of the ways that we might engage. What's actually, do you think, the sort of some of the obstacles that are in the way of, for example, this Australian Data Science Network and its members actually engaging with the academies around these reports? Like, what's the way forward, and how do you see we can work together in that? So I'm going to start with Louisa.
I don't think there are particular obstacles with engaging with the academies, but I guess it's important to recognise that the academy is basically a set of fellows, and its work, it comes together for advocacy, to make submissions to government, but it is a set of independent people, and it is a sort of a voice. I think one thing that could be done would be, it's a process of election of people to be a fellow of the academy. I think there's scope for more people who come from data science, biostatistics, those sorts of backgrounds, to actually join the academy, to form a stronger voice around data science within the academy. But that then, requires you to be nominated by other fellows. So find out who the fellows are, around, who are in your institution or your networks, and consider whether or not you're someone who should be being nominated to join the academy.
Okay, thank you, Louisa. That's great. What about you, Isabel?
So I'm relatively new to this space. I'd say I don't see many barriers. Basically, we just need to know each other better, as in, who's out doing things. I didn't know about the ADSN until Tim wrote. So I just think it's just keep doing, keep connecting, keep talking to each other. And I understand the issue that academies are largely fellows, but progressively we are also trying to, at least in the Academy of the Social Sciences, we're trying to move beyond that sort of fellow representation role into more of a really act as advocates for the entire sector. And we're well positioned in terms of we are not sort of tied to any particular organization. We are not for profit. We are policy oriented. So I just think we just need to keep working together. If that's your network and our academy are very similar in that we are both organizations that bring together workforce, bring together people like researchers, and that we are about community sort of initiatives. So that's like the lever that we can pull. So let's just keep doing more of this.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Isabel. What about you, Leslie? Please, Leslie.
I'd like to say lots on this. And if your network wants to approach our network, please do. I have been struggling running or being part of this data and science committee, which is kind of data science, for 10 or more years, and we struggle. And I think that's the issue, that the Academy of Science, therefore it is science, but data, people who do data and information, is not science. And in fact, we did a survey on the longevity of people employed in data science. This is a few years back, and the average employment contract was 3 months. So until it's accepted as being more part of it, of science, And my committee, or the committee I used to chair, is also the CODATA. So CODATA is the arm of the International Science and Social Science Unions. And so it's up there, but it's as if doing data is second rate science. And also in the major earth science conference is American Geophysical Union. Until 8 years ago, you could not report on data because you could only report on science findings. And as for fellows, well, we thought about trying to nominate a fellow to a data scientist this year, but you have to have 4 existing academy fellows, and we couldn't find them. And we only have 1 on our committee, and we're desperately trying to get another one, and we can't. So I think really come to us. We're welcome. And it's more that part that we said, greater recognition and acceptance within the employment, the career path for data science in the academic world. It's just so much that needs to change.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Leslie. And over to you, Shannon.
Yeah, look, while we live and breathe data every day, we recognise it's just a small part of everyone else's lives. So I think there's definitely a requirement to burden share there. Pick those who are willing and able to be good champions, and they're the contact points. So both the fellows and even champion organisations, and hopefully ARDC is one of those, and just connect those organisations, networks and fellows, and just keep advocating for the agenda, I think. Is my suggestion.
Okay. Thank you, Shannon. I see, Robert, you have your hand up. We have about 2 minutes. So what would you like to ask something or comment on something?
Yeah, I think that in terms of the social sciences and humanities, it would be good to outline to people the exciting projects that you might have. For example, in economics, now there's a big push on causal inference and things like that, and machine learning with causal inference. And that sort of should be quite attractive to a lot of people. And if other disciplines in the social sciences were to demonstrate, you know, the exciting possibilities, you might attract a lot of good people to them. Yeah, that's what I was going to. That's what I was going to say, because I think it's not just. It's really the attractiveness of these possible projects that is gonna, you know, will motivate a lot of people to do them.
Okay, thanks very much, Robert. Isabel, would you like to comment on that?
Wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, totally. Yes. No, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely with you, Robert. What can I add to that? It's yeah, that needs to happen.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody else like to make a comment or ask a question? We are perilously close to time, so I'm just asking if anybody would like to say anything. Okay, well, in that case, then I will draw it to a close so that we can finish on time. I really appreciate the contributions and presentations and thoughtful comments from our panel members. And I also thank you, all of the audience, for your time and your interest in attending this. I know that what we have done through this, the network, is to bring you as the leaders of your networks, of your centres here, and hopefully then that this work can then, or these discussions can then just be disseminated through your centres to your members. And if there are any comments from your members, then to then promulgate them up and then pass them through to the presenters here. Thank you very much, everybody. And with that, we'll close the session.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.